Why fests lahalt, Pachach lahap salachalacht, sin ksil heel michum, Chichamala stamia menimchil, in cha isquis teethkanate, keen seal sihuatum. Good day, elders, family, friends, leaders, young people, two-spirit and non-binary folks. My name is Teethkanate and I am from the Syilx and Sihuatum nations. My name Teethkanate was given to me on the day I was born from my tama, Eileen Alec. It loosely translates into standing by water. My English name is Elaine Alec, and my late father was Saul Kenzie Basil from the Bonaparte Indian Band from the Sihuatum Nation. He was the daughter of the late Saul and Louisa Basil from Bonaparte, and the great-grandson of Chief Basil David, who was one of our hereditary chiefs from the Sihuatum Nation. My dad was a part of the American Indian movement and the Red Power movement. He was partially responsible for the shutdown of the Department of Indian Affairs offices in Vernon, BC in 1974. He was labeled a militant and a radical by governments and RCMP. What they didn't capture, though, was that the reason he was taking over government buildings and putting up roadblocks was to ask the federal government for $200,000 for housing for elders in his community. My late mother is Sophie Alec from the Penticton Indian Band from the Syilx Nation. She is the daughter of the late Chief Jack Alec and Eileen Alec. She was also known as Philomene Francois. Back in the day, Indian agents and priests would come through our communities and they would just name our people either after themselves or after something. There was no rhyme and reason why people named our people the way that they were. And often our names were changed, many years later for record keeping purposes because it didn't suit the government's record keeping purposes. So they would change our names because of that. My grandfather, Chief Jack Alec, was our first elected chief of the Penticton Indian Band. When the Indian agents came into Penticton, they introduced the election system and let us know that they gave us all the rules and let us know that women could not be chiefs. And so the matriarchs of my community, the elder women, came together and they chose my grandfather, Jack Alec, because he was married to my tama. My tama was a daughter of Surimt, who was one of our recognized hereditary chiefs. And my grandfather remained chief until the day he died. So he was chief for 26 years. So I come from a long line of elected and hereditary chiefs. From my mom's side, it is through Kithbak Jetin, Surimt, and Pelkamulach. Pelkamulach was one of our great hereditary chiefs from Central Washington State, who had many wives from Washington into British Columbia, from the Rocky Mountains to the ocean. And I share that because back then marriages and arranged marriages weren't for power, but they were to create relationships between our nations. And it meant that we had to learn each other's protocols. We had to learn each other's language. We had to learn who to ask permission from whenever we were in each other's territories. And so one of the things that we learned was that when you go into someone else's territory, you need to find out who to ask in order to gather from that area, in order to hunt from that area, in order to take from that area, because the people of that place know that land, they know the names, and they know how to take care of it so that land continues to regenerate to provide for us. And so my mom's people are called Sinclips people. That means Coyotes people. And Coyotes people were given the responsibility to teach. And so for me, as a Syilx and Sihuatum woman, it is not a burden for me to teach. It is a responsibility passed on to me from my elders and my families, because I was privileged growing up. Despite the hardships that I experienced with abuse and alcoholism and all of those things that I experienced in my community, I was still raised with a lot of privilege. Because I know who I am. I know who my parents are. I know who my family is. I know the land that I come from. I was raised within those territories, knowing the stories and the language. And I have a deep connection and sense of belonging to that place and a sense of responsibility to that place. And that is a privilege that not many people have. And so that whole introduction that I've just shared with you is an introduction to who am I? And that's one of the very first questions that our people ask when making important decision making. And when they come together to govern, there are two questions that our elders would ask every single person in that circle to answer. And those questions were Suita Nui and Stimas Pu'us. And Suita Nui meant, who are you? And a lot of times an elder who speaks the language might come up to you and they'll say, who are you and what are you doing here? And it might sound really off-putting, or you might be like, oh, I don't know, and you'll get scared because you don't know how to answer. What am I doing? Am I allowed to be here? But it really does come from that original question, those original questions asked of you when you were to come into a room. You needed to be able to answer Suita Nui and Stimas Pu'us. And Suita Nui, if you loosely translated it into English, you could say it means who am I? Who are you? But there was so much more meaning that came with that question. It was, who are you? Who is your family? Who is your nation? What land do you come from? Who do you belong to? What is your purpose? And what are you going to contribute to this conversation? And that was an understanding and a recognition of the importance of identity. Do you know who you are? Do you know why you're here? Do you know how you're going to contribute to this conversation? And so that was really important for people to be able to answer, because if you know who you are, if you have a strong sense of belonging, you're going to have confidence. And if you have that sense of identity and connection and belonging, you're going to be in that big, beautiful part of your brain, which is the executive brain, the part of the brain that is creative, the part of the brain that helps you come up with solutions, the part of your brain that is problem solving. And so when you have connection, belonging, and safety, that helps move you into that part of your brain that helps you think well. And that's what we wanted from people. We wanted them, I want you to come into this place knowing who you are. I want you to feel confident. I want you to feel like you can contribute your voice, even if you're scared, even if you think it doesn't matter, even if you think it's weird, even if you think it's different. We want you to show up in your best possible way. We don't want to intimidate you. We don't want to make you feel like you don't belong. We want you to know your voice is important. And so in order for you to share from the best part of your brain, you need to know who you are and you need to have that confidence. And so a lot of our upbringing, those first years of our life, from the moment we were born to the moment we were young adults, we had coming of age teachings. We learned those things to help us answer that question. Who are we? What is our purpose? Where do we belong? And learning that connection to the land and feeling that connection to the land and the water. The second question that was asked of our people was Stimas Pu'us, and that meant, what is on your heart? And that was an acknowledgement that your heart is important in decision-making spaces. Your emotions are important in decision-making spaces, which is very different from colonial spaces. Because colonial spaces, you're expected to leave your heart at the door before you sit at the boardroom table. You're expected to leave your emotions aside and be a professional and just suck it up and separate your personal life from your professional life. And that's not possible because we're human beings. And we need to be able to show up fully as who we are and to feel safe in doing so. But colonialism has done a really good job of making us doubt ourselves, making us wonder, are we good enough? Do we fit in? Do we belong? And so being able to show up, and those first two questions we would be asked before we moved on to business, before we would move on to decision making, who are you and what is on your heart? Because that what is on your heart helps let go of any of the things you might be holding on to, because all of the things that happen to you, your emotions, your trauma, your anger, your fear, your sadness, your grief, that impacts your brain. And that impacts the way you show up in a space. And it impacts the way you contribute to solutions. And so many people have been in a meeting where there's a person who's just upset and mad, and they're just seeing the negative. And no matter how many solutions you come up with, they can only be negative, one thing after the other. and we wonder, what's wrong with this person? How come they just can't get with it? How come they like just be positive? You're not allowed to say anything unless you can come up with a solution. But it's because of where they're at in their brain. And if they're in that trauma brain, they're only working from 5%. And if they're only working from 5%, how are they supposed to come up with a solution? How are they supposed to contribute meaningfully to that conversation? Governments really like to use butts and seats as a way to measure success. How many people showed up at your meeting? And we're going to measure your success of engagement by that. But it doesn't matter if you have 100 people in a room. If 95 of them are working from their trauma brain, you're still not getting real meaningful engagement, because they will either stay quiet, they're not going to truly and meaningfully share their voice. They're not going to be able to they're not going to be able to come up with solutions and new ideas and ways of doing things. They might feel intimidated or scared. And so it doesn't really matter if there was 100 people there, if only 5 people were contributing, if only 5 people knew how to work in an action space and could respond to questions coming at them. And so really taking that time to answer, who am I and what is on my heart? So that whole introduction piece that I just shared was the center of this diagram. That whole introduction of who I am, who my family is, where I come from, who my parents are, you know, how they came into this space, that all answers those questions. Who am I? And how am I going to contribute to this conversation? Both of my parents went to residential school. You know, I became a raging alcoholic at the age of 12. And I started running away and hitchhiking across the province at 12 years old, and couch surfed and, you know, slept in a ditch a couple of times, and, you know, experienced that poverty and that abuse. And, you know, I did things that were illegal, and I did things that I felt shame for a really long time. And so I know what it's like to live in that trauma brain. I know what it's like to not be able to see a solution for later on in the day or tomorrow. You know, I know what it's like to feel completely helpless, and to not know how to answer questions. And so, you know, this tool I use for everything. It's called the Cultivating Safe Spaces diagram. I use it for my business planning. I use it for when I want to look at policies. I look at it when I think of my parenting. How am I going to decolonize my parenting and cultivate a safe space for my kids? I think of all of these things, whatever I'm struggling with, I look at this diagram. And so at the center of this diagram, you'll see understanding self, love-based practice, patience, and discipline. Those are the 4 necessary conditions for cultivating safe space. And so you cannot cultivate a safe space unless you are a safe space. You cannot cultivate a safe space unless you are a safe space. And the first condition I talk about is understanding self. Who am I? What am I good at? What is my purpose? How am I going to contribute to this conversation? Who am I and what do I need to feel safe? What are the things that annoy me? What are the things that trigger me? What are the things that make me mad? What are the things that make me sad? Because no matter what happens, I'm going to come into a space and that's going to happen. And people are going to have no clue, because you don't know my story. You don't know me. You know, you don't know the things I've lived through as a child that I carry in the back of my brain. You know, those things are a part of me and they make me who I am and the way that I show up in a space. And the moment I blame my emotions and triggers on someone else, I'm giving my power away. I'm giving my self-determination away. You triggered me. Now it's your job to fix me or heal me. You made me mad. Now it's up to you to make me feel better. You made me sad. Now it's up to you to comfort me. But people don't know those triggers, all of those things that happen, those are happening in your brain, your experience that nobody knows anything about. And so the only way I can get through and over my triggers is to feel the feelings. I have to feel the feelings. And most of us would rather get angry first. You know, angry is our bodyguard. Get angry and push and blame and criticize and condemn, because that's easier than feeling the hurt, feeling the pain, being vulnerable in spaces. And so We cannot cultivate a safe space unless we are a safe space. And so we need to be able to understand, and when I come into this space, who am I and how am I going to handle being in this space? What's going to anger me? What's going to trigger me? What's going to make me sad? And that I make a commitment to stay focused in that setting, but that I'm going to go back and look at that trigger and feel it and figure out why. Why did that trigger me? Why did that make me angry? Why did that make me mad? And that's the hardest thing to deal with. It's why we have so many issues with alcoholism and drug abuse and self-harm, because all of those things help numb the feelings and numb the pain. We would rather avoid them than feel them. And when we don't feel them, we can't heal. We can't heal and continue to do our, work from our best part of our brain if we're constantly being triggered. And so understanding self. This is the piece I forgot to share with you. Because I got distracted by hitting the record button, is I'm going to share this information with you, and I'm going to share this diagram with you. And if you're interested in more of the diagrams that I share, I'm not sure how much of it I'll share because every session I do is from the heart. They're never the same. I never present the same ever. But whatever I do share with you today will be free for you to use. And that is me decolonizing business. That is me decolonizing consulting. And that is me decolonizing education. I don't own this. It does not belong to me. Knowledge is no good unless you share it. And so I'm also going to share with you that you're going to learn and understand these things in your own way. You're going to interpret them in your mind your own way based on your language, your perspectives, and your experiences. And some of it's going to resonate with you and make sense, and you're going to want to implement it in your work. And some of it's not going to make sense, or some of it you're going to say, I love that. But how am I going to, I would do it differently. And I say, do it differently, make it better, improve on it. I don't own this. And it would be really egotistical of me to think that I'm going to be the expert and the only one who can do this work in this way. And so each of you are going to take different things from this, and you're going to learn to incorporate it and interpret it into the work that you do, however you do it. One of the things I learned as a young person growing up on the reserve, surrounded by old people, and I was so lucky. I grew up with old people, like the hardcore elders. I grew up in a time where I could go to a community meeting and all of the elders were speaking the language and we had to have an interpreter. I was so lucky, and I'm not that old, that's really rare. I'm 45. So to be able to have those experiences, I know how lucky I am now. And so all of this is free for you to use. But one of the things I learned from my elders is when I would learn something from them, say you learn how to create an agenda from this. And after I want to create my agenda using the tools that Elaine shared with me. And you're going to look at it and you're going to want to bring it to me and say, Elaine, did I do this right? Did I hear you correctly? And I'm going to not say anything because I don't know. Does it? How does it feel to you? Does it feel good? Then do it. Use it. Use it in the way you learned it. I'm not going to tell you that it's good or bad, right or wrong. And so all of this is free for you to use in any way that you want to in your work. And again, you can print this off and pull it into any of the work that you're doing right now. Even you consultants. I know there's a few consultants on the call too, and there's this thing about intellectual property and not using other people's stuff, but that's not the way that I do consulting in business. It's no good if we don't use it. And all I ask is that all of you who are here share it in the same way. You don't own it. You don't claim to own it. If you improve this framework and bring it into your work, don't claim it as yours. Share it freely in the way that it was shared with you. I'm sharing this from that place of trust in each and every one of you. So the second necessary condition for cultivating safe space is love-based practice. And this talks about exactly what I just shared. Colonial systems are based in fear and control. Laws, policies, Robert's Rules of Order, everything, the way we create an agenda, the way we build a survey, it's all based on fear and control. And so if we want to decolonize, we need to do the opposite. How do we do this work from a place of love, trust, and faith? And so as I'm doing this work, as I'm building this agenda, as I'm, hosting this meeting, am I doing this from a place of fear? Or am I doing this from a place of love and trust? Because as a facilitator and consultant, we're supposed to be the professionals. We're supposed to be the expert. We're supposed to be the ones who have all the answers. We're hired for that. They hired me because I'm the expert and I need to know everything. And so I'm going to show up in this space and I'm going to facilitate it, but I'm scared. What if they talk about this? What if this comes up? What if, I don't know what to do if things blow up? And so I'm already afraid. I'm scared. I'm working from a place of fear. So guess what? I control the agenda. I control the conversation. I control the timing. I control the questions that I'm asking people. And that's oppression. We're controlling and oppressing people. We're not validating and promoting freedom in the way that they show up in the space. And so how do I do this work from a place of trust? It goes back to understanding self. Do I trust myself? And it's tough because colonial systems have taught you to not trust yourself, not trust your instinct and what you were born with. You were born with everything you will ever need to know in this world, everything. You were born with instinct. We have stories in the Silk story chapter about humans. We were born with instinct. We were born with that. We're the only beings that were born with that. And so you were born with that. You're born with everything you will ever need to know. You have the answers. But colonial systems have made us doubt ourselves, get us to measure up, make us believe that there's one way. We have to be prepared. We have to be perfect. And those ways of thinking are upholding white supremacy culture and white supremacy characteristics is the need for perfectionism, the need to be prepared. That's upholding that system. And so even as an Indigenous woman, I am actively working at unlearning that. And I'm actively working at trusting myself, trusting my instinct and what I know. And so when I'm doing this work, am I doing it from a place of trust in myself or a place of fear? And if I trust myself, I can sit here and say, okay, this isn't working. I'm struggling, probably because I'm trying to control it. Can I just take a breath? And can I just tell myself, trust yourself, Elaine. Trust that you will have the instinct and that you will have the tools to navigate whatever comes up in this space. I don't have to be perfect. I don't need to have the answer. And if I don't have the answer, that doesn't make me stupid. That doesn't mean that I'm not an expert in what I do. It doesn't mean that I shouldn't be here, because nobody knows everything. But for some reason, we think we have to. And if we don't know it, we think we have to learn it and study it and know it and be prepared before we come into a space, instead of believing and trusting everything about who I am and what I know and what I was born with is good enough, and that I belong here. And so am I doing this work from a place of love or a place of fear? And to go a little bit simpler, like our elders say, keep it simple. Ask yourself, does this feel good or does this feel bad? What is your gut telling you? Does this feel good or does this feel bad? And if it feels bad, let's take a look at it. The third necessary condition for cultivating safe space is patience. And this is patience for self and then patience for others. So I talk a lot about the brain and the way, it moves in and out of the trauma brain, and it moves in and out of the executive brain and the emotional brain. So I'm just going to share this diagram, and I'm going to take a drink of water. So when we are at our best, when we feel connected and belonging and safe, we're in the green part of our brain. That's the executive part of our brain. We are creative, we're efficient, we're on, we feel really good about ourselves and what we know, and we feel confident enough to speak up, and our brain's just on. We feel amazing, we feel confident and proud in the spaces. When we're in our emotional state, that's the limbic system. And that's where I say, don't ever try to talk to or work with a person who is in their emotional brain, because it's just like talking to or trying to work with somebody who's intoxicated. When you're in your emotional brain, the only thing your brain is thinking of is, am I loved? Do I belong? That's it. They're not comprehending anything else, no matter how simple you lay out the language, no matter how many times you repeat it and simplify it for them. They're not going to process it. It's not going to make sense to them. You cannot reason with somebody in their emotional brain. It's impossible. And the only way to get someone out of their emotional brain is to cultivate a sense of safety, cultivate a sense of connection and belonging. So when someone's in their emotional brain, the only way to get them out of it into their green brain is to cultivate connection and belonging. So how can I cultivate connection and belonging for this person right now who's just, I can't reason with them at all. They're too emotional. And then there's the survival state, which is the brainstem, the trauma brain, the lizard brain. That's where you're only working from 5% of your brain. You can't focus, you can't concentrate, you can't problem solve, you forget things, you drop the ball, you make mistakes, you're not with it at all. You're like, what the heck's wrong with me? That's when you're in your brain stem, and the only thing your brain is asking is, am I safe? And my trauma therapist said, when you're in your trauma brain, the only thing it's thinking is, what can I eat? What's going to eat me? And what can I have sex with? That's all your trauma brain is processing at that time. And so the only way to get out of the trauma brain is to cultivate a sense of safety and connection and belonging. And so when we are in our trauma brain, what is the first thing we think? When I wake up, something happens, I get triggered, I can't think straight, I get emotional, I make a mistake, I forget things. The first thing I do, what's wrong with me? How come I'm so dumb? How come I can't get with it? Why am I so lazy? What's wrong with me? That's the first thing we start to think of when we're in that part of our brain. And then when we see someone else doing that, a colleague, someone we work with, a client, how come they're always late? Why are they always making mistakes? What's wrong with them? How come they just can't get it together? They're probably in their trauma brain. And the only way to get out of the trauma brain is to cultivate a sense of safety, connection, and belonging. And so patience. When you feel like you're being the problem, or you think someone else is being the problem, can I just take a moment and practice patience and ask myself, am I cultivating a sense of safety, connection, and belonging for myself? And if it's someone else that's being a problem, are we cultivating a sense of safety, connection, and belonging for this person? Because most of the time you don't have a problem employee. Most of the time it's not lateral violence or bullying. Most of the time it's somebody living in their trauma brain, and all they need is that patience, and for us to find ways to cultivate safety, connection, and belonging. And so the fourth necessary condition for cultivating safe space is discipline. This is the discipline to listen. Can you listen to everybody in this space without judging what they're saying as right or wrong, good or bad? Can you listen to everybody in this space, in this meeting, in this circle, without judging what they're saying as right or wrong, good or bad? And a bigger challenge from our elders, can you listen to the person that you absolutely cannot stand, the one that just annoys the crap out of you? Can you listen to them without judging what they're saying as right or wrong, good or bad? Does not mean that you agree with them. Doesn't mean you have to like it. but it means keeping your mind open to information, because the more information you have, the more knowledge you have, the better decisions you make, the more inclusive you are. Our society has made it, we've become really good at not listening. We've become really good at cutting people off, debating, trying to prove them wrong, make them think the way that I think. We've become really good at shutting out people that we don't like. Someone comes into a meeting and we don't understand them or like them, or they annoy us, we will look at our phone, we will make an excuse to leave. And so when that happens, people know when they're being listened to, and people know when they're being dismissed. And what do you think happens to somebody when they feel like they're being dismissed? They don't feel connected. They don't feel belonging. They don't feel safe. They don't feel heard. So many people would not need a communications plan if they practice the discipline to listen. Can I listen to everybody without judging what they're saying? And it takes practice. That's why this is the word is discipline, because you have to practice it. And that helps me as a facilitator in understanding myself. I'm going to go facilitate this space with 30 people. There's a reason I do everything. There's a reason why I limit certain spaces that I'm in, because I know my limit. I can only host a space of 30 people, because there's a chance that 30 people could be done their circle in 20 minutes. And there's a chance that they could go for 4 hours. And I need to be prepared to sit there and listen with discipline to all of them. And I need to know myself. What type of group is this? What are we going to be talking about? What did I eat this morning? Am I going to get enough sleep? And make sure I don't drink a lot of water while I'm talking, because I can't get up and use the bathroom because I'm hosting this space. And I know what my limit is. I have an understanding of self and the way my body works. And so I pay attention to that, because those things impact the way I show up too. If I'm tired, if I'm anxious, if I didn't eat well, those things are going to impact the way I show up to listen with discipline. I'm going to be annoyed easily because I'm tired. I'm going to be cranky. I'm not going to be able to pay attention. And so I think about all those things when I go into a space, and then I understand myself, and then I can communicate it to people. When I go into a meeting, I'm really tired. My kids were up all night. I might look like I'm angry, or might look like I'm not present, but I'm just really tired. And I'm going to do my best to listen to all of you, but I just need to let you know that, because people don't know, right? They don't know what they don't know. And so if I understand myself in that way, I can communicate it with others and build those really good relationships with people. So those are the 4 necessary conditions for cultivating safe space. Outside of this diagram, you see promote well-being, promote inclusion, promote freedom, and promote validation. And so the opposite of those things are to promote sickness and death, to promote exclusion, to promote oppression, and to promote shame. And so those 4 things are colonial tools that have been used for decades, for centuries, to colonize people. Those are colonial tools to promote sickness and death, exclusion, oppression, and shame. And all of us have been colonized. We've all been colonized, some longer than others. And so how do we decolonize? We do the opposite. How do we promote well-being? How do we promote inclusion? How do we promote freedom? And how do we promote validation? And so one of the tools, or one of the exercises I have groups go through when I do a training, because I do 3 and 6 hour trainings with people, and some of them are just a really deep dive into the tools, and some of them, I get them to do breakouts to work through some of these tools. And so one of the breakouts that I'll do is I'll get the group to sit together, or they'll go into breakouts, and I'll ask them, talk about the ways that your team upholds sickness, exclusion, oppression, and shame. I want you to talk about that. And it's going to be tough. And it's so, every session happens the same. You hear them like, oh, we're doing a good job. And, they don't want to admit or acknowledge the ways that they do uphold sickness, oppression, exclusion and shame. And I'll share a couple of ways that I do and the ways that they show up in my work. But this is one of my favorite phrases, and I see Barb on the call. But one of the favorite tools I have from this program that we took part in is, you cannot change or heal what you do not acknowledge. And so how do we change or heal our systems and the colonial tools that we're unknowingly using? So maybe we do know we're using, but how do we change it or heal it or shift it if we're not acknowledging it? So we have to acknowledge it. We have to have that conversation. How are we upholding sickness, exclusion, oppression, and shame? Sickness, I'll just share with you right away in any team. If you work with an organization, company, or government, is HR policies. HR policies uphold sickness because they were put in place to promote the effectiveness and efficiency of an organization and the way that it runs and produces work, the way that it makes money. And those policies are put in place to manage humans as resources. And so those policies have been in place for a really long time. And we're trying to improve them. And how do we fix it? We see what's happening, all over the world. We have people quiet quitting. We have people burning out. We have people, there's a big recruitment recession happening. We see it when we go to the store. There's a shortage of people willing to show up to work. We just came through a global pandemic, a global trauma, and we're showing up into these spaces, and it's back to business as usual, upholding these systems and policies that don't support the well-being of humans, don't support our need for rest, don't support our need to be heard, to feel connected, to feel safe, to feel validated. And I'll share a little bit more. I have another diagram to talk about that a little bit, but so that's a lot of the work I've been doing, is working with HR companies and like, how do we decolonize our policies to support humans, the well-being of the people in our teams, and how you can still be effective and efficient without having all of these rules and policies to control them, because that's what they are. They're policies put in place to control people and the way that they work. And then how do we promote exclusion in our life, and that not listening to certain people. I won't listen to someone I don't like. I'm not a saint. When I show up in a space and someone's being really racist, it's really tough for me to listen with discipline to that. And it depends on where I am and how well I've taken care of myself and if I'm rested. But even those moments, I challenge myself to listen. What's underneath that? Where is that coming from? And then how do we promote freedom instead of oppression? I think about my kids, and how do I promote validation instead of shame? And so when I think of my daughter, I have 3 kids, but I have a daughter who's 12, soon to be 13. And when I had her, I cried. I cried because I had a girl, an Indigenous girl in Canada. And I was so afraid that the things that happened to me were going to happen to her. And so now she's 12, that's where a lot of things, bad things started happening to me. And so I'm starting to be fearful. I'm triggered now because my daughter turned 12. I don't want her to be hurt. I don't want these bad things to happen to her. And so guess what? I start parenting from fear. And then I try to control and make up all of these rules based on my life experience and what happened to me in my state, which makes absolutely zero sense to her because it's not her reality. And so if she doesn't listen to me and respect me, then I'm going to shame her to protect her, shame her to make her act right, because I don't want her to be hurt. And so now I've acknowledged this. So now I have to do something about it. And so the next time I feel that coming up, and that anger and that pain, and when we start arguing and yelling at each other, I feel that and I stop and I practice patience with myself. And I ask, how am I cultivating a safe space? How am I cultivating connection and belonging for me and her in this moment? And so there's so many different ways we uphold sickness, exclusion, oppression, and shame in little tiny ways, and in very big ways. But I always talk about the 1% shift. You know, you can't change everything overnight. You know, everything change takes time, and it's going to, you know, take all of us to make those 1% shifts utilizing the gifts that we have. And we can't tell anybody else how to use their gifts or how they should be contributing to that change or that shift. And so, you know, using all of these tools tomorrow and implementing it, and, you know, would be impossible. We can't do it. You know, it's not going to come for a very long time. You know, that vision that we want to have for our people. And when I say our people, I mean all of our people, all of our relations. When we say Yayati Simsilk in our language, it means all of us living beings, all of our relatives. That's what we mean when we say that. And so, you know, how do we do this? We make those 1% shifts. And so there's something that I'm teaching here might resonate with you, and you'll say, oh, I can use that. Take that 1% piece of this diagram and use it in the work that you do. And know that there's, you know, how many other people on this call that are also going to take 1% of this diagram and take it into the work that we're doing, because we can't do it all. We can't. It really depends on that communal understanding that it's up to all of us. You know, that's the way things were done. It wasn't up to just one of us to carry the load. But many of us feel that way now because of the existing systems we live in. And so those things also mean very different things for us, depending on what perspective we are. And none of it is good or bad, right or wrong. It can be and. We are good and bad. We are right and wrong. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us human. We are good and bad, right and wrong. And we shouldn't feel shame for that. You know, it makes us human. And so there's the traditional perspective, the relationship perspective, the innovative perspective, and the action perspective. The traditional perspective, they are the storytellers, they are the knowledge keepers, they are the corporate memory of an organization who knows everything about this company. They've been there for 30 years, they can tell you everything about it. They like to share their lived experience as a way to contribute to decision making. And so if you ask them a question, if you ask their breakout group, you know, 5 questions and give them 30 minutes, one of them is going to talk for 20 minutes and they're going to tell a story about how in the beginning, and they're going to go on and on. The other traditional perspectives aren't going to care. They're going to be sitting there, you know, sitting back, arms folded, listening, nodding their head. You know, they don't care that one person is talking for 20 minutes. They'll just listen. And that's the traditional perspective. They're storytellers. They need time to share their stories. I'm a storyteller. If you invite me into a space and give me 5 minutes to talk, I'm not going to do it. I won't accept the invitation. If you put me on a panel and tell me I have 10 minutes, because I know myself now, I used to try to do that and fit into these little boxes that people tried to put me in. And I always messed up, you know, because I wasn't being my true self and I was trying to fit into this way of doing things. And I just would always feel all over the place. I know I need time. I know I need time to be able to share my stories. I don't speak my language fluently, but I understand it because I grew up with our language speakers. And so when I share stories, I go on and on and on because I'm sharing our teachings and I'm sharing them in English, which means I have to tell all of this stuff, all of this detail, because English does our language no justice at all. My family always told me, you cannot lie in our language. Our language is very descriptive. You know what you're saying. You can't misinterpret it like you can with English. I can share one word on this call in English and everybody's going to understand it in a different way. Some of you will find power in it and some of you will be offended by it. It's just the way that language is. It's a horrible language. And so, you know, I'm a storyteller because I'm sharing the knowledge of my ancestors, and I need time to do that in order to do it in a good way, to honor, you know, the things that our language talks about. And so I know how to ask for that now. I understand myself. I know the way that I contribute to decision making, and I know the time that I need to be able to do it in a way that feels good to me, in a way that I feel honors the way that I think and do things. The relationship perspective are the ones who care about relationships. They don't want to leave anybody behind. They want to include everybody. They don't care how long it takes. They will take the time they need to bring everybody along. And that is success to them. And so if you give the relationship group 30 minutes and 5 questions, and then you ask them to report back, they're going to burst out laughing and say, we only got to question 2. We all had to take turns introducing ourselves, and we talked about our kids, and we were like, we got a little emotional, and but it felt good because we connected. To them, it was success. The action's going to be like, but you didn't get the work done. Because to them, that's success. But for the relationship people, that is success because they connected and they did that work. Relationship would be very offended by a traditional person. If a tradition person ended up in the relationship group and talked for 20 minutes, the relationship group would get very upset with them because you are taking up all of the time and you're not thinking about anybody else. And now we only have 10 minutes for everybody else to share. And now we're going to have to go over on our time because we can't cut anybody off. So we only have 10 minutes, but if we have to talk for 30, we're going to do it just so everybody gets involved and feels like they were a part of it. And so that's how they make decisions. They make sure everybody's included. That's how they contribute to decision making. And they think of things that we wouldn't think of. And so they're really good at coming up with the engagement plan. They're really good at coming up with the communications plan, planning the events, and how we're going to engage community members. The relationship groups are really good at that. The innovation perspective, they are the ones who are the systems thinkers. They create change, they're visionaries. And they're the ones that ask a lot of questions. And they're always excluded. Innovation perspectives are always excluded from the moment you get to school, right? When somebody asks a question and everybody shoots their hand up, and that one kid, wants to put their hand up, but they still need to think about it. And they think they should have their hand up because everybody else's hand up, but they, then they come up with the answer tomorrow. And then they wish they would have had the time. Doesn't mean that they're slow. Doesn't mean that they don't understand it. They just need the time to process. They need to ask questions. And when innovation people ask questions, guess what happens? People think they're being a problem. People think they don't understand or get it. People think that, well, you should know this by now. Why are you asking so many questions? Or, oh, why are you questioning me? You don't trust me? You don't trust the work we're doing? And a lot of times they're misunderstood. And so their ideas are always parking lotted. So if you've ever been to a workshop and you see the facilitator writing things down and an innovation person shares their idea and the facilitator is like, oh, that's a little bit out of scope. So we're going to put this in the parking lot. But the innovation person who's sharing knows exactly how it fits in. It's not a parking lot. It very much is part of the work that we're doing that you can't see. But if you can't see it or understand it, you're going to exclude it just because you don't get it. Right? So we're excluding, we're not validating and promoting freedom of the way they're showing up in a space. And so innovation people need time. Don't ask innovation people to brainstorm. It's going to drive them bonkers. People talking back and forth really fast for 2 hours. By the time you're done, they're still thinking about what you talked about at the very beginning of the day. And if you want them to meaningfully participate, you're going to have to give them another 2 days afterwards. So how can I promote freedom for innovation people? Can I give them information in the beginning? Can I give them a few days afterwards? But if I'm holding meetings and I'm expecting them to work in this moment and produce something for me right now, I'm excluding and oppressing and sometimes even shaming and promoting sickness. For those other perspectives who don't show up in that way and not really knowing how and why, but they're already feeling like they don't belong. They don't feel connected. They don't feel safe to share the ways that they do things. And so they hold back. And for facilitators, guess what happens when innovation people need time and quiet? The facilitator gets scared because it's quiet. So they're like, start asking probing questions. It's the worst thing to do for innovation people. Innovative people are usually policy people. You know, they're always doing systems change work. They're the ones who want to show up and work inside the system to try to change it. And so, you know, they need time and quiet. So breaks are so important. When you have a meeting, don't prioritize the meeting agenda and questions over your breaks. For an action person, if they want to get through their agenda, they'll say, let's get rid of all of our, let's make it a working lunch. Let's get rid of our, you know, bathroom breaks. Like we're just going to work right through it all. That's not promoting inclusion, because those breaks are time for traditional perspectives to tell their story. Those breaks are time for relationship people to connect. Those breaks are times for innovation people to process and think. And maybe if they have a long enough break and they have some time to think, they might actually contribute to the conversation when you come back. And so those breaks are really important. It's one of the really simple tools I share with people to promote well-being and to promote inclusion in spaces, is thinking about these things. And then the action perspective, they are the linear thinkers. They like to get things done. They don't like spending a whole hour and a half doing a round of introductions about who am I and what is on my heart. Are you kidding me? Like, we have a lot of work to do. Like, we need to get with it. Like, let's just do a round table. Everybody 30 seconds. Who are you and what's your title? And then we're going to get down to business. Action people are usually leaders because they get things done. You know, they just do it. They action it. You know, they're really good at that. And they're really uncomfortable in those spaces of relationship. You know, they can do it, but it's not always comfortable. And so even the way they show up in spaces and promote well-being, inclusion, freedom, and validation is different for all those perspectives. They need different things to feel those things in those spaces. So action perspectives, you know, they need to know that when I come into this space, it's going to be an effective use of my time, efficient use of my time. I don't want to just sit there and, you know, go around in circles. Like, do we have, you know, an agenda? What are the questions we're going to be asking? Are we going to get any work accomplished by the time we're done? And that is valid. That is totally valid. And they are just as important in the work and deserve to feel validated, free, included, and well. A lot of times they're made to feel like they're too harsh, or they're too this, or they're too, you know, they go by the book. They, you know, they're not taking their time to pay attention to others. But all of these perspectives, none of them are right or wrong, good or bad. They're all needed, especially if we want to shift systems. And so if you give the action perspective 30 minutes and 5 questions, they're going to be done in 20 minutes with a bulleted list of all the things that need to be done. And then when they're done, they're going to go do other work, or they're going to try to go to the other groups and help guide their conversations. Because they just want to get on with it. They want to make sure that we're all going to end up in the same place. And so action perspectives make sure that things get done. And so when I'm creating agendas and I'm planning events and I'm doing surveys, I'm asking myself, how am I creating this agenda to promote well-being, inclusion, freedom, and validation for a storyteller, a tradition perspective? How am I going to promote well-being, inclusion, freedom, and validation for a relationship perspective? And then all the way around, thinking, how am I doing that in this agenda that I'm creating? Oh, I'm going to take a minute here. And so that's how I would design an agenda. My agenda would be, first thing, we do our opening. I would welcome people. I would lay out our protocols. And this is something that you can do ahead of time, or you can do on your own and introduce it to everybody. But I also use well-being, inclusion, freedom, and validation as the protocols of how we're going to meet together. And so if I'm working with my own team, I might ask them, how can we promote well-being? And then we'll do a little poster that says promote well-being, and then a list of all the things we're going to do to promote well-being for each other. And then I'll ask my team, how are we going to promote inclusion? How can we include your perspective in the way that you do things? How are we going to promote freedom? What do you need, in order to show up, to be who you are, and to contribute from your way of knowing and understanding? And then how are we going to promote validation for you? And how are we going to validate your way of doing things? And again, all of them are going to have different things, and we'll be aware of that. So I would start the day and introduce the protocols. This is how we're going to promote well-being, inclusion, freedom, and validation in this space. And then, we would do a break, and then, we would say, we're going to do a round of introductions. Who am I and what is on my heart? And everybody's going to share. For the relationship and tradition, they're going to love this. Depending on how many people are in the group, I will time it, or I'll ask people to time themselves. Sometimes everybody gets a minute and a half, and a minute and a half is a pretty decent time to introduce who you are and what's on your heart, unless you're a tradition perspective. If you're a tradition perspective, then I ask you to time yourself, because that's what I do. You're going to put me on a limit. I better put my timer on, because I will talk for 20 minutes and think I only talked for 5. I know myself. I know how to work within other spaces. And so that's the other thing, is one of the challenges I have for people is, if you can pick up a document, say a strategic plan or an action plan, and if you can open up that plan and read it from beginning to end and understand and get every part of that plan, then you've excluded people. But if you pick up a document and don't understand it, there's bits and pieces you don't quite get, that's okay. You can let go of that, because you know that you've included a perspective that you don't understand or get. And what usually happens is, a lot of times leaders will create an action plan. They'll send it out to all of their team members, and they'll say, now action this. And then their team members kind of freeze, and they're not quite sure how to action it. And the leader's wondering, like, what's wrong? It's right there in the plan. And then they take a moment and they go, oh, I know what we need. We need an implementation plan. And then they start going around and figuring out how to get people to implement this plan. But if you properly included all of those perspectives, you wouldn't need an implementation plan, because people would see themselves in the work and they would know how to carry it forward. And so there's going to be parts, if we're looking at how to decolonize the way that we do things, we're going to have to be okay with not knowing everything and understanding everything and getting everything. We're going to have to trust ourselves that we're going to know how to do the work. And that means we also trust others on our team, that they will be able to carry things forward that I don't get or understand, and that I'm not going to tell them how to do it. And so promoting well-being, inclusion, freedom, and validation in the work that we do. So I'm just looking at the time, and I want to go to this one diagram just to kind of tie back to what I was sharing about trauma. And this is a little handout that I give out. But this stress curve here, I can spend a lot of time talking about the stress curve. But there's different things that put you into your trauma brain. So there's trauma, the trauma that happens to you, PTSD, secondary traumatic stress or cumulative stress can impact your brain and move you into your trauma brain. Anything that triggers you. So cumulative stress can move you into your trauma brain, just like a big trauma can. Cumulative stress are the little things. Cumulative stress is, I'm a little bit worried about work. I'm a little bit worried about my kids. I'm a little bit worried about money and the bills. I'm a little bit worried about what's on the news. I'm a little bit worried about the climate. Like, all these little things add up. It's cumulative stress. It piles on top of each other, and it shoves you into the lower part of your brain, where you're only working from 5%. So when there's little stress, your performance is inactive, you're laid back, you don't really care, you got a lot of time to get it done, I'm not going to stress about it. When you're at your optimum stress level, that's when you start to feel fatigue. So yeah, I'm tired, but I can show up and get the work done. I can do my work if I have to. I'm just a little tired. And then when there's too much stress, that's when you hit exhaustion. Like, you are exhausted. You can't think, you don't even want to answer a simple question. You know, you get up in the morning and if your family tries to talk to you and you're like, I can't, don't ask me anything right now. Like, I'm done. You go to work and you open up your emails and you look at your, you know, messages, and you can't even comprehend what's written in front of you. So you close it up again and mark it as unread so you can come back to it later. You know, those moments of exhaustion where you just can't think, you just can't focus. And then it hits burnout, where it's anxiety, panic, fear, breakdown. That's burnout. You are done. You cannot function. You cannot, you know, get anything done around you. You're tired. You know something's wrong, you know, and maybe if it's bad enough for you, because we don't like asking for help, but maybe it's bad enough that you go on your own, or that someone that loves you makes you go to the doctor, and the doctor tells you you're burned out. You're suffering from exhaustion. And now I'm going to write you a note, and you can bring this back to your employer, and you can go on short-term disability or long-term disability, depending on what your doctor says. And so you go and do that, and you find out, wow, you can take off 6 to 12 months for short-term and long-term disability for burnout and exhaustion. That's how long, that's the minimum amount of time it takes for your brain to heal from burnout and exhaustion. And so why? Because I get asked to do this training every day, all over the country. And every group I'm working with, it doesn't matter what type of organization, company, or government they are all in the orange and red. Everybody's in the orange and red. Why? Because we're not cultivating safe spaces for people to come forward earlier to say that they need support and help. It's not safe. Because if I came to work and told people I needed help, or that I needed support, they might say, how did you get this job? You should know how to do that. You can't handle it? Get a different job. You want to be in this work? Get a thick skin. You know, you must be incompetent if you can't handle this. And so we don't tell others when we need help. It's not safe, because we're worried about what other people will think. We're worried about being demoted or laid off or told to find another job. And so how do we cultivate safe spaces for folks within our teams and our organizations? One of the things that I share is, when you are like working from 5% of your brain, I've talked to a lot of people on my different teams and people I've worked with. And I said, when you're in that trauma brain, you know you're burned out and tired, how much work are you actually getting done a day? And it averages at about 30 minutes a day. I'm working a 7 to 8 hour day, but I'm probably getting like 30 minutes of real work done a day. Everything else is just like slugging through the rest of the day, low hanging fruit, you know, doing the little things that need to be done that don't require a lot of brain space. You know, I'm just doing the bare minimum. I'm quiet quitting. You know, I just can't manage right now. And so you think about that, but they're afraid they have to show up to work, because our policies say you need to be at work, you know, from this time to this time, no matter what. And everything else is measured about how much time you're allowed to take off and what that looks like. And the notes, you have to validate, you know, how you're feeling. All of these policies and process to come forward and say, I need a break. I need time. Even if it's just 2 days. I just need 2 days to sleep in. I just need 2 days to cultivate a sense of connection and safety and belonging for myself with my family and myself. Just 2 days. Just let me take that time to help myself move back into the part of my brain where I'm feeling good about myself and the work that I'm doing. But we think, you know, it's going to cost money. It's going to cost us money to do that. But you think of somebody working from 5% of their brain for 2 weeks, you're only getting 5 hours of work out of them, really. And so thinking about that, how do we cultivate a team where we can have that connection, belonging, and where people feel like they're able to come forward and share when they're struggling and they need time. The trauma can stem from a whole bunch of things. It can stem from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, war and other forms of violence, childhood abuse or neglect, grief and loss. This is another thing that I talk about with teams, problem employees, and letting go of people when they've been a problem. Grief and loss impacts your brain, the chemicals in your brain, for 12 months. And like the most stuff that's going on in your brain when you're experiencing grief happens for the first 12 months. And if you're healing through that, if you're taking the time to grieve and process, after a year of doing that work around your grief, you should be able, your brain should be able to heal, and recalibrate the chemicals in your brain so that you're functioning at that higher level. But our society doesn't allow for that. When you lose somebody, you have to prove, one, how close you were to that person in order to take time off. And then you only get a couple of days off to go on bereavement. And so one of the things I ask employers and managers and team members is when they're having a problem employee, they're having their ups and downs, what's wrong with them? First, I ask them, can you ask the question, am I cultivating a space of safety, connection, belonging? And two, have they experienced loss in the last 12 months? So many people lose their job in the first 12 months after losing a loved one, because grief comes in waves. You never know when it's going to come. And when it comes, you're living in 5% of your brain. You're making mistakes. You're not showing up. You're a little bit cranky, all of these things where you look like you're being a problem when you're really grieving. And so just acknowledging that. And putting a support system in place where you recognize, hey, this might be grief. Hey, maybe you can take, another day off and just rest. Maybe you can cancel your morning meetings and sleep in a bit. Taking a look at how we can support people when we're experiencing that. And then medical interventions. Medical interventions is anything that happens. One thing that I share with people, one is when women have experienced C-section, they're completely not validated for the trauma that happens to their body, and they're expected to just get over it because it's a regular process that happens, a surgery that happens all the time. The doctor does it, hundreds of times a week or whatever. But it's not normal for your body. It's trauma. And you can experience PTSD for a very long time after that without even realizing it. Because again, we're not validated for that. And then the other thing I want to share is dental appointments. Dental appointments is trauma. It's trauma on your body. And so if you know one of your team members is going for, a dental surgery or something to do with their teeth, expect them to be a little bit out of it for the next 2 or 3 days. Like we always like to blow it off like it's not a big deal. But some of those things are like massively traumatizing. Root canals are really bad. Somebody is going to be triggered for a really long time after that. And so being gentle on people.
You should be done by 2:30. Can you call me back at 2:40?
There we go. And so making sure that, we're thinking about even little tiny things like that. Accidents, natural disasters, and pandemics, witnessing acts of violence, and cultural, intergenerational, and historical trauma. I take a moment on this one. Cultural, intergenerational, and historical trauma does not just belong to First Nations and Indigenous people. We are not the only ones that experience that. A majority, if not all, people who have come to Canada came as a result of war and violence. Many children were put on ships and sent to Canada as orphans, or they were sent by their parents hoping that they would reconnect again one day. Many of these children experienced trauma and violence by the war and abuse, violent abuse to these children, and then came to Canada and then experienced more trauma and abuse. Many of these kids who experienced that trauma and abuse ended up in nunneries or places where they became priests, where orphans go. And those traumatized children were put into residential schools. And so hurt people hurt people. People ask me all the time, how can Canadians contribute to reconciliation, help Indigenous people? And for one, the one thing I say is that's the wrong question to be asking. Like, Indigenous people need to be helped, fixed, and saved. Like, we are the problem in Canada when we only make up 3% of the population. If there's a problem in Canada, it's not Indigenous people. And understanding reconciliation can't happen if you're looking at the other person. Reconciliation cannot happen if you are focusing on me. Imagine doing that in your relationship. Imagine doing that in a relationship with someone you love and looking at them and saying, I want to reconcile. So what can I do to help you and fix you? You know, that's not how it happens. Reconciliation is not about looking at the other person, but all about what can I do to heal. I'm going to share this little story with you about this. You know, when I was 5, I heard for the first time in my life that I was a wagon burning squaw at 5 years old. And I went home and I told my grandma, and this is what my grandma said. My grandma said, feel sorry for them. She said, feel sorry for them because you don't know what's happening at home for them to make them want to hurt you so bad. Feel sorry for them. And then the next thing she told me, which really stuck with me, was feel sorry for them because they probably don't know who they are and you do. And when people don't have power from within, they try to take power from outside of them. And so they were trying to disempower me by taking away my identity to make themselves feel powerful. And so I grew up like that. That was what racism was to me. When I looked at racist people, I feel sorry for you. You don't know who you are or where you come from. You have no sense of connection or belonging and no identity. You know, this might hurt some people and be a little bit triggering, but Canadian is not an identity. Canadian is not an identity. American is not an identity. Who are you? Where do you come from? Who are your people? What lands do you come from? What are those stories? Your blood remembers that. And so when I share my stories with you and you get excited about them and they feel good, it's because your blood is remembering who you are, that you have those stories. You don't have to be First Nations to have stories and have blood memory. You know, I've been doing a lot of reading on Celtic stories and teachings and, you know, the Netherlands and, you know, all of those stories that were labeled folklore and pagan, right? Like they were evil, witchery, you know, and so, you know, those things were not validated and told that they were just mythical, you know, but our stories, we know they're not. Those stories that we share from our people, they're not legends, they're not folklore. Those were the instructions given to us that told us our responsibility and gave us our laws for living well within these lands. And everybody has that. And so one of the things that I heard from my elders growing up was that not everybody will remember their creation stories. Not everybody will remember who they are or where they come from. And not everybody will remember their language, but we are Syilx people. We will continue to share our stories and our language with you until you remember your own. And so my people, the Syilx people, did not believe in appropriation of knowledge. Knowledge was meant to be shared. You know, we can't make decisions from a place of fear. No good decisions are ever made from a place of fear. If I don't tell you our stories of this land and territory, if I don't tell you the language, if you don't know it, how are you supposed to know how to live well here? How are you supposed to know how to regenerate this place, to care for it, to take care of yourself in this place, because these stories are all about healing. And our elders would always say that the state and the health of the land is a reflection of the state and the health of the people. And so if our land is unhealthy, that's a reflection of the people. And if we need to heal the land, we need to heal ourselves first. We cannot look outside of us to do that work. It has to happen from within. We have to do that work. So when people ask me, how can I contribute to reconciliation? How can I, as a Canadian, help Indigenous people in Canada? My answer will be to heal. Heal yourself. Heal yourself and find out who you are and where you come from. Feel that confidence and that sense of identity and belonging to who you are, so that you can show up with confidence in this place and not come from a place of fear, so that you feel empowered and you know that you belong, that you know that you have that identity, and you will pass that on to your children. And then maybe your great grandchildren and my great grandchildren can be in the same space without them calling my children a wagon burning squaw. And so that work starts from within, that healing. Stop looking at other people and how to fix them and change them and make them listen, and how they should advocate and how they should be an ally and how they should be, you should do this and do that. People ask me, how can I show up? Trust yourself and your instinct. When you're making decisions and showing up in spaces, does it feel good or does it feel bad? And trust that, because people are going to show up and say you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it good enough. You should be doing it this way. And they're going to use shame to put you in your place. And it's going to be up to you to understand yourself enough and have that confidence and trust your instinct that you feel good about the way you're showing up in this space and contributing. I can't tell you how to do that. And so there's a couple of other little diagrams here that just talk about how vicarious trauma shows up in your workspace and personal life. But it's exactly what I talked about earlier. You look like a problem. You look like a problem employee. You look like a bully. You look like all of these things when you're living in your trauma brain. And it's not, you're not a problem. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with them. They're working from a place of trauma. And the only way to come out of your trauma brain is to cultivate safety, connection, belonging. That's it. That's all you can do to get people out of that part of their brain. But the way we do things in our systems is we utilize shame. We utilize control to get people to show up and do their work in a good way, or the right way. I shouldn't say good, the right way. If you're going to show up, you're going to do it the right way. And these are the policies you have to follow to do that. And so one of the things I share around that is what are some tools we can use for vicarious trauma and supporting people is just talk about it. Talk about and make it a conversation within your teams and workplaces, within your families. Trauma is a real thing, the way that it impacts your brain. And if you're acting up or, being, a problem, let's take a look at this and see how we can cultivate safety, connection, and belonging for you. Because one of the things I've asked people, and I've done this work with a few different groups now, is when you started your job, because when you work with highly traumatized populations, you are at risk for experiencing vicarious trauma, which ends up looking like problem employees, bullying and lateral violence. I'll ask people, when you started your job, did someone pull you aside and say, look, we work with highly traumatized populations, and as a result, you may be exposed and start to experience vicarious trauma. And this is what it looks like. And these are some of the tools that we have in place to support you. But we don't do that. We make it all about us being bad, us being wrong, us not being smart enough, good enough, the other person not being good enough, smart enough, instead of saying, hey, this is probably trauma. Hey, how can we support each other? Hey, this is what is happening, and there's nothing wrong with you. These are some ways we can support you. Monday team meetings is my favorite thing. Can you do Monday team meetings from 9 to 10 with your team, and everybody just shows up and says, talks about how was your weekend? What does your week look like? Do you have capacity to help anybody, or do you need help from somebody else? and what is on your heart. And that helps so many different things on teams. Do that every Monday with your team. Because what you might hear are things like, I had a rough weekend. My aunt is in the hospital. All my family are here. I can't focus and concentrate, but I have a deadline on Thursday. Somebody on your team might be able to say, hey, I know what you're doing. I can help you with that deadline. You go ahead and go be with your family and cultivate that connection and belonging with them. And if we don't have anybody on our team, guess what? I'm on the call. I'm one of the team leads. I'm the boss. You know, maybe I can find someone to come in and support you, or I can talk to the client and say, hey, we need a little extension on this. Can we get this into you next week? And not once has a client ever told us no, not even government. You know, it's really important that we start prioritizing people's well-being, you know, over everything else, because we could force ourselves. I could force this person to show up and get this report done for you by Thursday, but I guarantee you they're going to make a mistake. I guarantee you it's not going to be up to par with what they're used to or what you're used to receiving from us. So we could, but those mistakes are going to cost you time and money, because we're going to have to come back and do it again. And so, you know, finding ways to support team members and their well-being and prioritizing that. Imagine having a team of people all working on parts of the work, working from the green part of their brain. You know, not forcing the people to work when they're working from the trauma red part of their brain. So before we go, I have one more diagram I want to share with you, and a gift. This is called the 4 Food Chief story, or how food was given. It's one of the 4 stories that our elders came to talk about back in the 80s about what we needed to write down for people to be. And this was it. So before there were humans, there were animal people. And among those animal people, there were 4 chiefs. There was Chief Black Bear, who was chief of all things that walked on the land and flew in the air. There was Chief Bitterroot, who was chief of all things that grew below ground. There was Chief Saskatoonberry, who was chief of things that grew above ground. And there was Chief Spring Salmon, who was chief of all things that lived in the water. One day the creator came to the chiefs and said, there's going to be a being that comes, and you have to figure out how to keep this being alive. So the creator left the being between the chiefs and left, and the chiefs looked at the being and they said, this is the most pitiful excuse for a being we've ever seen. It's born with no fur to keep it warm, no teeth to eat, nothing in its brain. How are we supposed to keep this being alive? It was a baby. So the chief sat there and talked for a really long time before they looked at Chief Black Bear and said, well, you're the oldest, you tell us what to do. So Chief Black Bear said, I'm going to lay my life down now. And this being can have everything that I am. It can have my meat, it can have my fur, it can have whatever it needs. So all the other chiefs agreed that they would do the same thing. The Chief Black Bear said, I'm going to lay my life down now, and you have to sing me back to life. So Chief Black Bear laid their life down. All the chiefs came to sing their song. Chief Black Bear didn't come back to life. So all the other animal people came to sing their song. Deer, muskrat, squirrel, they all came to sing their song. Still Chief Black Bear didn't come back to life. Finally, the last being came. Let me sing my song. I want to sing my song. Everybody swatted them away. Go on, get out of here. Nobody wants to hear your song. All you do is eat crap and bug people. Nobody wants to hear your song. It was Fly. Fly managed to come in anyway and sat on Chief Black Bear's ear and sang their song, and Chief Black Bear came back to life. That story is a longer story. I've compressed it into 3 minutes. I was also told that we're not supposed to interpret our stories for you, that whatever you learn from this, you figure it out on your, you learn whatever it is you're meant to learn from that story. But there was one person who asked if they could share what they learned. And so I share this teaching, this interpretation is, he said, Fly's voice, that annoying voice that no one wants to hear, is like that little tiny voice in my head, that I want to share something, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid to share it because I'm worried that people aren't going to think I'm smart or that I'm way off, and I don't want to share it because it feels insignificant. But the story gives me permission to share that little piece of seemingly insignificant information, because it could be the one piece of information that could bring life back. And so this story makes it a requirement for everybody to share their voice, no matter what it is. and that every voice matters, even the one you don't like, even the one you think isn't important, even the one that you think is annoying. And so before we leave, I want to share this last teaching with you. And this, I hope, will help you cultivate a sense of connection and belonging for yourself, especially if you're struggling with that right now. Sometimes my presentations can bring a lot up for people, and sometimes they feel grief around that, or a transition in the way that they think and their worldview. And so I want to share this story with you before you leave. When we were little, and we were given coming of age protocols, one of the things that we were always told was go to your elders whenever you have a problem, because your elders know everything. And so I would go to my elders as I got older and ask them to help me. And guess what my elders would say? They would say, go to the water. And so I would go to the water and I'd stand there and wait for some answer to come to me. And I used to get so frustrated because I didn't know what I was supposed to do there. But as I started to get older and I would go to the water, I started to understand why I was being sent to the water. And I didn't really realize it fully until I was 44, I'm 45 now. And so I just want you to take 10 seconds to just close your eyes and imagine yourself standing by the water. Even the thought of water brings a sense of safety, connection, belonging. And what I started to find out was all of the things I struggled with, had me in my lower brain, and standing by the water helped cultivate that safety, connection, and belonging for me, so that I moved into the part of my brain where I had an idea, I had a solution. Your best ideas come when you're in the shower. And so what our elders were teaching us was self-determination. You are born with everything you will ever need to know. You have the answers. And if you are struggling with belonging, go to the water, because we're all made of water. 60 to 80% of our bodies, wherever we're at, are made of water. We are born from water. No matter who we are, we cannot live without water. And so the water will always accept you. The water will always take care of you. It's only natural when you stand by the water, you feel that connection and belonging. So if you're struggling with that, I encourage you to go to the water. And I didn't learn until I was 44 what my name really meant. The day I was born, my tama named me Tithkanit, and that means standing by water. And so I share my name with you and those teachings. And I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you all for taking this time. I did remember to record, so I will have my son get this prepared and put on my YouTube page. So it's just youtube.com/Elaine Alec. And so if you subscribe to it, it'll let you know when it's uploaded, because I'm not sure exactly when he'll upload that. And then we'll make sure to include the diagram in the comments for you to download as well. So Wai Limlim, Yayati Sim Kasil, thank you, all my relations. Have a really good day.